For as long as humans have gazed skyward, the moon has been a focus of fascination. We could always see our cosmic partner's mottled, cratered face by eye. Later, telescopes sharpened our views of its bumps, ridges, and relict lava seas. Finally, in the mid-20th century, humans visited Earth's moon and saw its surface up close. Since then, a volley of spacecraft has studied our nearest celestial neighbor, swooping low over its dusty plains and surveying its curious far side. Now, after 6 decades of exploration, humans are trying to explore the moon further as another step towards human development on Earth and a stepping stone for future missions to Mars. Ultimately, aiming for the universe. Early this year, a Japanese spacecraft has soft landed on the moon, making Japan only the 5th nation in history to achieve the feat. Called Smart Lander for Investigating Moon, or SLIM, the car-sized robotic lander. Initially launched in September 2023, JAXA's Smart Lander for Investigating Moon, or SLIM, a car-sized robotic lander, took nearly 4 months to slowly reach the moon's vicinity and finally entered lunar orbit on December 25, 2023. It then spent 3 weeks gradually lowering its orbit, down to just 15 kilometers in altitude, before beginning its landing attempt on January 19th. It is the second Japanese spacecraft to attempt a landing on the moon. The first, the Hakuto R mission from the Japanese firm Space, crashed into the lunar surface in April 2023. Only the US, the former Soviet Union, China, and most recently, India had successfully landed on the moon before now. The mission's primary goal was to test a new method for extremely precise automatic lunar landings, earning SLIM the nickname Moon Sniper at JAXA. The mission had a targeted site that is just 100 meters wide, in contrast with the kilometers-wide landing zones of previous missions, such as the crewed Apollo landings. The demonstration of that pinpoint landing is the symbol of the project, says Yui Nakama of the European Space Policy Institute. SLIM sought to reach this precision thanks to cross-checking its position against detailed mapping of the moon's surface by Japan's Kaguya Orbiter and NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO. Using onboard navigation cameras and autonomous image processing, the spacecraft continuously scanned the surface and identified craters and boulders to adjust its descent in hopes of a safe pinpoint landing. Having lowered its orbit to an altitude of about 5 kilometers, the spacecraft then began a vertical descent, free-falling to an altitude of 500 meters before firing its thrusters to hover and scan the surface below for obstacles. It next dropped to 50 meters and performed another hover and scan until, tilting on its side, it fell to the surface from a height of 3 meters onto the slope of Scioli crater. The touchdown should have been gentle because of the moon's weaker gravity, as well as cushioning from 5 small spherical shock absorbers. The whole landing procedure lasted 20 minutes, referred to as 20 minutes of terror by SLIM's sub-project manager Kenichi Kushiki in a blog post last year, and was followed by an agonizing extended wait as mission controllers struggled to understand what had befallen the spacecraft on the lunar surface. Demonstrating such a precise landing could be a valuable tool for targeting regions at the moon's poles that receive permanent sunlight to prolong the lifetime of landers, or for visiting scientifically rich locales. According to Osinski, who is part of the geology team selected by NASA for upcoming human landings that the agency has planned for the water-rich lunar South Pole, it opens the door for going to more scientifically interesting places. We want to go to big boulders or rocks exposed in crater walls. You've got to be sure you're not going to hit any of those on landing. However, things didn't go entirely to plan that day. It's been a wild ride for SLIM ever since it made a precise touchdown on the rim of Scioli crater on January 19th. It ended up upside down. Images of SLIM taken by the baseball-sized robot rover Lunar Exploration Vehicle 2 or SORA-Q, which was released by the spacecraft just before landing, revealed that in achieving this precise landing, SLIM came down rotated at 90 degrees, effectively landing on the tip of its nose. Japan Times reported that SLIM project manager Shinichiro Sakai explained that JAXA scientists believe that SLIM's strangely orientated landing came about as a result of one of its two main engines stopping during the 30 seconds or so of touchdown and at an altitude of around 50 meters over the moon. This engine failure caused Slim to drift 55 meters away from its chosen landing site. Without the glitch, Slim could have landed as close as 3 to 4 feet from the selected region of the moon. The SORA Q image shows the shift in position meant that Slim set down on the sloped ridge of a lunar crater. This incline caused the spacecraft to roll westwards onto its nose. But Japan Times added that Sakai said that the loss of the engine was the result of an undisclosed external factor, adding a camera had captured an engine nozzle lying on the lunar surface. This statement really confuses everyone. As a matter of course, when a mysterious element appears in a story, people's imaginations go wild and plots appear in droves. What's more, there are many unknown things about the moon. There has been a long-standing debate about the origin and purpose of the moon. While many scientists believe that it was formed from debris left over after a planetary body collided with Earth, others believe that it may be more than just a natural satellite. In fact, some people go so far as to claim that the moon is an alien base. Proponents of this theory point to a number of unusual features of the moon that seem to defy explanation by conventional scientific theories. For example, some researchers have noted that the moon's surface is littered with strange structures and formations that appear to have been artificially constructed. They point to the fact that some of these structures resemble pyramids, domes, and even abandoned mining equipment. Additionally, some have noted that the moon seems to be hollow or at least partially hollow. This theory was first proposed in the 1960s by two Soviet scientists, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbakov, who argued that the moon was artificially created and had a thick outer shell, but was essentially empty on the inside. They believed that the moon was constructed by extraterrestrial beings as a base from which to monitor and observe Earth. Other researchers have also pointed to unusual seismic activity on the moon that seems to defy explanation. For example, some have noted that there are regions on the moon where seismic waves seem to travel much faster than they should be able to. This could suggest that there are large empty spaces or voids beneath the moon's surface. So, could the moon really be an alien base? While there is certainly no conclusive evidence to support this theory, there are certainly some interesting and unexplained phenomena associated with the moon that suggest that it may not be just a natural satellite. However, it's also important to note that there are many more mundane explanations for these phenomena that have yet to be explored. For example, the surface of the moon is scarred with tens of thousands of impact craters of various sizes. Scientists suggest this is due to the fact that there has never been an atmosphere on the moon to protect it from bombardment by space debris. There are no natural erosive forces like wind or flowing water to affect its surface, and there is little geologic activity to conceal damage done throughout the moon's history. When you study the distribution of craters, you find the surface is totally saturated. That is, there are craters with increases in the number of craters right down to the smallest scale of size. One of the things that's really interesting about lunar craters is that even though some of them are very large and some of them are very small, they all seem to have the same depth. This uniformity in depth is unusual on a planetary body, where there should be a variation in depth. So why are the moon's craters so uniform? It's really not explainable in terms of conventional or established geophysics. Some of the craters on the moon are nowhere near similar to what they should look like. In fact, they are incredibly wide craters, and wherever the impact point is, they're convex, which means they're still the bulge of the moon. This phenomenon doesn't make any sense. It's likely that there is something under the lunar surface that is very resilient and is preventing craters from going any deeper than they do. This could only really be either much harder rock, which can't be because of the mass of the moon, or alternatively, a metal sphere of some kind, which is preventing more damage. Does the uniform depth of the craters on the moon suggest some sort of metallic barrier underneath moon rock and dust? But if so, why wouldn't mainstream scientists acknowledge this? Ancient astronaut theorists suggest that by doing so, they might also have to acknowledge that the moon may be hollow. November 20th, 1969, During their ascent back to the command module, Commander Charles Conrad Jr. and lunar module pilot Alan Bean released the Apollo 12 launch vehicle and crashed it back to the moon. Upon impact, something very unexpected happened. The moon was said to have seismically reverberated like a bell for more than an hour. With Apollo 12, people refer to it as a crash, but it wasn't really a crash. It was an aim deorbit of the rocket used to lift off the lunar module. The crew separated the launch vehicle and crashed it back into the ground right close to where they had installed a seismograph. Well, it vibrated, so it was kind of an early clue as to how solid was the surface of the moon. What was amazing about this is that suddenly the moon began to ring like a bell and did so for nearly an hour. Dr. Wernher von Braun, who was then the head of NASA, decided that for Apollo 13, they were going to intentionally crash a heavier portion of the rocket into the lunar surface. When they did this, the moon rang like a gong, this time for over 3 hours and to a depth of over 20 miles. This was not expected and still puzzles a lot of scientists today. The inference is that the moon must be hollow because the moon is made predominantly on the surface of a kind of rock called basalt. Although it's a very lightweight rock, it also absorbs impact extremely well. So, if the whole of the moon was made of that kind of rock, you wouldn't expect it to reverberate when a large impact took place. The reason that this is played down is because the idea of the moon being hollow just contradicts what we know about physics. On the other hand, let's not forget the terrifying claims revealed by a very few people who have ever set foot on the moon, the Apollo astronauts. When the Apollo 8 spacecraft flew around the far side of the moon, the signal to Earth was cut off for around 10 minutes. This loss of signal was a daunting time for the flight crew and mission control. Apollo 8 was alone and truly cut off from Earth, venturing where no human had ever gone before. As the astronauts came back around from the far side, a collective sigh of relief was breathed by many of the flight team at Mission Control in Houston. Charlie Duke describes what it was like to be flying over the far side of the moon. The computer told us that we were out of contact with the Earth and that we had loss of signal, he says. Then, all of a sudden, there was the sunrise. It was the most dramatic sunrise I've ever seen. In Earth orbit, you see the sun's glow on the horizon or the planet's atmosphere, and it gets brighter and brighter. The moon is different though. There's instant sunlight with long shadows on the lunar surface. The far side of the moon was very rough back there. I would not have wanted to land on the backside of the moon. After the success of Apollo 8, Apollo 9 went back to vital low Earth orbital testing of the lunar module. So the next astronauts to visit the far side were Gene Cernan, John Young, and Tom Stafford on board Apollo 10 in May 1969. Just 2 months before the historic landing of Apollo 11. However, while flying over the far side of the moon, the trio of astronauts encountered something strange, which in the last few years, NASA has been forced to re-explain thanks to conspiracy theory documentaries airing on US television. The facts had been well known since the 1970s. These strange events on Apollo 10 were manifest in the form of some very odd sounds. The radio systems on board the Apollo spacecraft were crude by modern standards, though state-of-the-art at the time. The command and lunar modules were relatively noisy environments, according to most of the astronauts, with bumps and bangs combined with the whirring of fans and engine noise.
That didn't mean to keep it sound outer spacey, didn't it? Do you hear that whistling sound?
What the Apollo 10 crew heard through the radio systems baffled them. They described it as being almost like that, made by an electronic instrument called a theremin, often used in creepy science fiction B-movies of the 1950s and 60s, as well as on the Beach Boys song, Good Vibrations. Throughout that time, the astronauts discussed the strange music. That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? One of the astronauts asks. You hear that? That whistling sound. Boy, that sure is weird music, lunar module pilot Eugene Cernan says in the notes. We're going to have to find out about that, his colleague command module pilot John Young says. So far, it still isn't clear where the strange sounds were coming from. In conclusion, While the theory that the moon is an alien base is certainly intriguing, it remains a topic of speculation rather than scientific fact. While there are certainly many mysteries associated with the moon that have yet to be explained, it's important to approach these phenomena with a healthy dose of skepticism and an open mind, until we have more concrete evidence to support the idea that the moon is an artificial structure. Interestingly, these secrets can be unlocked this year when interest in making precision landings on the moon is ramping up as several nations seek to return human crews to the lunar surface for the first time in decades. 2024 ahead promises to deliver some spectacular pursuits, pushing human and scientific exploration of the cosmos further than it's gone in decades. The visions are grand. NASA plans to send astronauts on a lunar flyby mission that will travel deeper into the solar system than anyone has ventured in more than 50 years. The U.S. Space Agency and its allies are mapping out ways to establish a permanent settlement, while countries including Russia and China are chasing similar dreams. And some of the world's richest people continue to chase their extraterrestrial ambitions. Meanwhile, science-focused missions are enhancing the collective understanding of our universe faster than ever before as we enter a golden age of academic research. Missions intended to explore the potential habitability for life on ice-covered ocean worlds in our solar system and to survey the aftermath of a spacecraft intentionally ramming into an asteroid are expected to launch this year. And one research team even wants to test the feasibility of biological materials used in space exploration and launch a wooden satellite. Here's a look at the exciting moments ahead in 2024. NASA is planning to carry out its most complex and high-risk endeavor in decades with Artemis II, a mission slated to launch in November that will carry 4 astronauts on a trip around the moon. It will mark a historic feat, since no human has traveled beyond the area of space in Earth's immediate orbit since the Cold War-era space race of the 20th century. This mission will circumnavigate the moon, brushing by its surface but never touching down. It will build on a successful uncrewed test flight of NASA's Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft in late 2022. The 4 astronauts on board will be NASA's Reid Wiseman, Victor Glover and Christina Koch, and the Canadian Space Agency's Jeremy Hansen. Koch will be the first woman to join a lunar mission. If successful, Artemis II will pave the way for the launch of Artemis III, which aims to land humans on the moon for the first time since Apollo 17 in 1972. As NASA gears up for Artemis II, SpaceX, the Elon Musk-run venture, will be racing to spur development of Starship, the largest rocket and spacecraft system ever developed. SpaceX has grand plans for Starship, which conducted 2 test launches in 2023, both of which ended in explosions over the ocean. Though Musk and SpaceX have grand visions for Starship, including sending the first humans to Mars, NASA also plans to use the rocket system alongside its own SLS rocket and Orion spacecraft for the Artemis III mission, slated to launch as early as 2025. Starship will carry the astronauts from the Orion spacecraft as it orbits the moon and ferry them down to the lunar surface. There's a long way to go beforehand, with SpaceX needing to figure out how to launch Starship safely into orbit, land and reuse both the rocket booster and spacecraft, as well as figure out how to refuel the gargantuan vehicle while it's in orbit. SpaceX will be looking to make significant progress on those fronts in 2024 with additional test flights. Why the moon is still one of the most popular targets for space exploration missions. Scientists are investigating specific geological features on the largest moons of both Jupiter and Saturn that could be ideal spots for the emergence of life elsewhere in the solar system. The team, led by researchers from the University of Hawaii at Manoa, looked at what are called strike-slip faults on the Jovian moon, Ganymede, the solar system's largest moon, bigger even than the planet Mercury, and Saturn's moon, Titan. Faults like these happen when fault walls move past each other horizontally, either to the left or the right, with a famous example here on Earth being the San Andreas Fault. It's sort of like a giant crack, rift, or certain type of crevice in the ground. Such seismic features are generated on these icy moons, scientists believe, when these bodies orbit their parent gas giant planets. The planet's immense gravitational influences generate tidal forces that squash and squeeze the moons, inevitably flexing the natural satellite surfaces. Plus, these tidal forces aren't very consistent because the orbits of both moons are elliptical, meaning they are sometimes closer to Saturn or Jupiter. Other times, they're much farther away. That, in turn, leads to even stronger tidal forces. Saturn's moon Titan has surface temperatures of around -179 degrees Celsius. This is incredibly cold, cold enough that the water of this moon actually plays the role of rock. It can crack, deform, and ultimately form faults. During its flybys of Titan, NASA's Cassini spacecraft was able to determine that this moon of Saturn may have liquid water oceans tens of miles beneath its thick shell of ice. Additionally, Titan is the only solar system moon with a dense Earth-like atmosphere, meaning it has a similar hydrological cycle with methane clouds, rain, and liquid flowing across the surface to fill lakes and seas. For this reason, Titan is already considered one of just a few bodies in our solar system that could support life, as we know it at least. When the NASA Dragonfly mission arrives at Titan in 2034, it will send a rotorcraft lander to fly across the frigid surface of this moon in an effort to hunt for those potential biological signs. That doesn't exactly mean it'll search for bug-eyed aliens, however. At the very least, the team hopes the lander will detect the chemical building blocks of life we're familiar with. The Dragonfly mission is initially set to land at the Selk crater area on Titan, a region that is also of interest to Liliane Burkhardt, lead author of the research and a scientist at the Hawaii Institute of Geophysics and Planetology, and the team. This is because when calculating the stress exerted on Titan's surface as a result of tidal forces, the researchers weren't only focused on whether there might be signs of extraterrestrial life on the ground. They also explored the chance that the Selk crater region could be subjected to shear deformation to figure out whether it's a safe landing site option for Dragonfly in the first place. Burkhardt and colleagues also looked at the geology of the Jovian moon Ganymede to investigate the icy body's history of tidal stress. In particular, the team looked at a bright region in the northwest of Ganymede called Phyllus Sulcus, which is composed of parallel sets of fractures. The researchers basically looked at available high-resolution observations of the area to find that there were different degrees of tectonic deformation in bands of light terrain that cross over each other. The cross-cutting nature of these bands indicated to Burkhardt and colleagues the existence of three distinct eras of geological activity: ancient, intermediate, and young. When investigating other parts of Phyllus Sulcus, the team found the direction of slip features to have different alignments. This implies these features may have been generated by processes other than high tidal stress. The geologic investigations undertaken by this team and others are vital for informing the missions of spacecraft that aim to explore solar system moons like Titan and Ganymede. That's all the information that we have for you today. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe if you haven't already, and hit the bell so you never miss out on future episodes. And be sure to also tell us what you think about today's content. Everyone's support motivates us to continue delivering quality content and to always improve. As always, thanks for watching, and we will see you next time.